Thank you so much for being here. This is the second out of four live streams where we are going to be discussing the book IFS-Informed EMDR, Creative and Collaborative Approaches in front of a live audience. There was incredible guests on this panel. They are some of the authors of the section in the book where we are talking about frameworks and what frameworks that are so essential to really keep in our consciousness as we're doing EMDR and IFS. We came back to again and again the importance of relationship and how this is really what keeps people safe and feeling like they could connect not only with themselves, but also with the world around them. I really appreciate the unique perspectives that the panel brought, each person in the panel brought today in this discussion, and also how there's a thread that really was able to connect this entire conversation and really show how each of these frameworks connect and tap into compassion, curiosity, and a real deep understanding and appreciation for the complexity of human suffering. We speak about dissociation, oppression, intersubjectivity, spirituality, predictive processing, and systemic trauma that people go through. I hope you enjoy the upcoming episode. Welcome to Empowered Through Compassion podcast. If you are interested in the intersection of trauma healing, compassion, and personal transformation, this is the right place for you. Join me, David, and my wife, Heather, along with other clinicians, trainers, authors, and leaders in this evolving world of trauma healing. Through compassionate conversation, we look at powerful therapeutic approaches. Please join our Lunch, Learn, and Live Stream, a free opportunity to connect with the ETC community. These are held on the second Tuesday of every month at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. For the next 4 months, we will speak with a panel of authors from the newly released book, IFS-Informed EMDR, Creative and Collaborative Approaches. Check out the ETC website, empoweredthroughcompassion.com, and click on live stream to see our guests and to register for each event. Please remember that this podcast is not a substitute for therapy. If you are seeking support for your own healing, I encourage you to reach out to a trained professional. Hello, welcome to Empowered Through Compassion. This is the second live stream that we have on our book, IFS-Informed EMDR, Creative and Collaborative Approaches. And today is going to be I'm just thrilled. I'm thrilled with who I have here. Each one of you is just, it's a pleasure to work with, to be part of this space. I'm going to be introducing everyone. Richard Falkenstien, who is, he does a lot of work around somatic integration, neuroscience, professor, writer. He brings an important dimension to this work. And I really appreciate, this emphasis on attunement, embodiment, intersubjective space that's created and constructed. Then we have David Archer, who he invites us to think more deeply about systemic issues, the ways trauma and oppression can become embodied, and specifically anti-racial psychotherapy, which he's written a lot about. He's a therapist. He's a certified trainer now in EMDR, which is awesome. But really that work within larger relational systems. And I really appreciate his perspectives, the way that you're able to hold both complexity and compassion in your work. So welcome, Michelli. Simpson, it's such a pleasure to have you. She brings this incredible awareness to the intersection between trauma, identity, culture, attachment, and systemic experience. I really appreciate you and how you bring, your work of trauma work beyond just the individual nervous system, but that relational cultural context. So Athena, Phillips, welcome to this space, to welcome here. She brings a bridge conceptual understanding between clinical presence and relational healing as well. Perspective invites clinicians to think about not only what we do in therapy, but how we build connection, create environments where there's dissociation, which is such an important piece of the trauma work, and the breadth of knowledge that you bring in your trainings and your writing and in the work with dissociation and how that enters into this field that we're talking about. And Laura Kosak, who is a really thoughtful, wonderful, compassionate IFS EMDR therapist, who brings this level of spirituality and transformational healing, talking about, in your chapter, how we create meaning in our life, wholeness and meaning, and reminding us that healing is not only about the symptoms, but it's these deeper elements that allow us to see the spirituality within and among each other. The question that I want to ask each of you, and interpret it in your own way, but it's about yourself, your work, and what conceptual framework or core insight from your chapter most changes how you approach healing in the therapy room. I guess to kick us off, Bridger.
Thank you so much, David, for the introduction and for just the invitation. One thing, perhaps just to speak more broadly to the gratitude I have for the book, is I feel like it really beautifully represents a lot of perspectives and a lot of sensitivities that authorship from just one or two cannot. And so I love so much and appreciate so much the anthology approach to the book and just the diversity of experience and conceptualization, postures. And I was happy to be able to contribute a chapter that in some ways articulates a model for case conceptualization, but the title of the chapter being A Window and a Mirror. And this is a sensitivity that I really work alongside the co-founders of the Institute, of Beyond Healing Institute, and the other co-authors of Somatic Integration and Processing. Really the sensitivity being around the intersubjective space. So I think to answer your question as directly as I can, the invitation within the chapter is in some ways a reminder that this work of therapy, even more broadly than just with EMDR or IFS, but this work of encounter is as much a two-person or a three-person psychology as it is just looking at what is the client's experience and what brought them to the room. So part of that invitation is to see the essence of the encounter between therapist and client, that we are as much involved in this work as the client is. Whether you think of that through just our presencing and what we contribute in spoken language or body posture. For me, I really take it very deep into our histories, our identities, our cultural experiences, our systemic experiences, and really the makeup of our mind expressed through our personality. That is as much a part of the work as is what the client brings in. And so SIP in some ways gives us a foundation to look through with attachment and neurodevelopment, or what we just call relationship, somatic psychology, what we refer to as body, and then memory reconsolidation and adaptive information processing, what we call memory. So these three spheres make up the Venn diagram that's presented in the chapter. And we use that as a metaphor of lenses to look through. But just as the title would remind us, that is as much a mirror as it is a window. So looking into the client's experience through the intersection of these three large lenses, and then seeing from our own lived experience what we contribute to that space, and how from the intersubjective side, how those begin to interact, our lived experience, the history we bring into the room, and that of our clients. So I was happy to be able to contribute the chapter, and really articulate the invitation, I think pretty straightforward, that it is an invitation for us to come to the room with awareness and intention of the presence that we represent and the history that built it, that shaped it, and to really see the relationship as that, as a relational field of engagement and encounter, not just a therapist doing something to a client, but the reciprocal nature of influence and resonance and dissonance. That posture, as we seek to cultivate that throughout our career, I feel is essential when looking at compassionate witness or understanding, rupture and repair processes in psychotherapy, and then the facilitation of the EMDR protocol from an IFS perspective. So, yeah, I'm very happy to be able to join you all and share.
I think, Bridger, you really summarized, a complex chapter that really kind of sets this foundational network, which is beautiful. So thank you for
Thank
that.
you so much.
And all right, so moving on, David Archer. I know this next chapter was very important and really, I think, a necessary layer to this work. And it was really the collaboration of two people, of David Archer and Michelli Simpson. So, David, maybe you're the one that I'm looking at. Maybe if you could share about your chapter, same question about, the importance, what you would like somebody to take from it, and how it changes the work.
Well, first, I just wanted to say this is amazing to be speaking with so many knowledgeable colleagues that are here. This chapter, of course, couldn't have been written without Michelli. And Michelli might not say it, but Michelli is a legend in the field of EMDR. Okay, one of the first people to do teletherapy with EMDR before it was cool, before the whole COVID thing came. So I just got to give a special shout out. It was a blessing writing that with you, Michelli. And David, like, thank you again for doing this, for bringing us together in this way. I will say that for the chapter, it was also amazing for me to write this and to bring in the perspectives relating to parts, starting off with people who usually are not seen as being psychotherapists, but still have ideas relating to parts, of talking about W.E.B. Du Bois and the idea of there being a double consciousness, and that as a Black man, I need to know what white racist people are thinking so that I can survive. In the same way that, like, women have to know how men think in order to survive patriarchy. In the same way that Bridger's talking about knowing about the therapeutic relationship. And also, Bridger didn't, I don't know if it's okay to say, Bridger, but you're also dropping another gem. You're also writing another book okay, sorry. I don't want to, okay, sorry. I don't want to spoil it. But just to say,
Please drop the gems. Drop the
okay. No,
gems.
it's just because, I was reading that, man. It's nice. So all of that just to say is that not only do we need to know about how we are feeling, we need to know how the client is feeling and the relationship in between them. In the work that I've been doing in Montreal, in Toronto, in the Indigenous communities, we also need to know the relationship that the society has towards us as well. And it's just very interesting where, depending on your social identity, it just increases the chances of certain things happening to you. So this is why we need to just be aware of the idea of race. And race, I say, because it's a thing that can be fatal. It's a thing that can lead you to being seen as being undocumented and being accosted by governmental forces. I think race also is one of the reasons why, in part, why we're currently witnessing the historical end of the American Empire, and how we are all unfortunately brought along for this ride. That there's a lot of historical things that are taking place. I mean, like, there's a lot of strange things that you may not necessarily believe are connected to your race or to your identity, but are definitely connected to your clients' identities. I have clients in Canada who are refugees, came from different countries, fearing for their lives. And because of social media and what they see with what's going on in the United States, and like the unlawful detentions and all the terrible things, even though they're not American, their trauma is still being reactivated.
Mhm.
So when I'm talking about rhythm and processing strategies, when Michelli and I are talking about the importance of being able to have collective forms of negative cognitions and positive cognitions, of just thinking about this from a cultural perspective, we are literally talking about perspectives that can make the difference in people's lives. And it's just for us to widen the scope and know that even if you're working with someone who's different from yourself, is just to know that the society does impact them. And so we just need to be aware of these things. So it's definitely a blessing for me to be included in the book and to have written this chapter. But my goal ultimately is not only just to help to increase and improve service delivery for our clients, the trauma survivors, the bravest people who divulge this information. It's also to create systemic change in us as therapists as well. We need to do a little bit better. We need to be a bit more compassionate, and we need to make sure that there's changes that can improve the next generation.
I love what you're saying. And both of you really speak to how important it is to really be aware of ourselves and what we bring into that space, into that room with us.
What I was just thinking as you were speaking, David, is the activation of parts in the context of conversations around, patriarchy and racism and these systemic issues that affect people very deeply and personally. And then there's this reactivity, the push against it, which is an act, obviously, or not obviously, but maybe from a perspective of IFS, these are defenders that reside within us, perhaps protecting against shame or surrounding participation in these systemic harms. I don't know, but I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts about that, or if there are conversations around not just activation within our clients or within ourselves as therapists, but also the reactivity that we're seeing when we start to voice things that we need to be more aware of as a culture, and then we are met with resistance, and not just subtle resistance, but rageful resistance sometimes.
That is a beautiful question. Does anybody have thoughts? I know we'll definitely continue and pick up to keep introducing all the chapters, but I think we could hold both things.
Yeah.
But what comes up for people with that question?
Yeah, Michelle, you got that one? You want me? What do you
Yeah,
think? Yeah.
yes, I'm here like, I know that is it's a big thing right now. I'm honored that David is like, hey, you wanna write a chapter with me about those things? Like I'm very honored. One of the things that we talk about is how people who are not from the groups that are oppressed, or oppressed twice or three times, or depending how many layers you have there. One, they have the fear to talk and be correct and be shamed. A lot of other people react and shame that person that is asking a question. The invitation here for that fear to speak up and be attacked is, imagine how the people that you can represent, that you can bring your privilege, and doesn't matter what the privilege is, right? Because we are talking not just the skin color. We have so many privilege, right? And so imagine like the people that have that privilege to talk and not being pushed down of who you are as a sense, as a person, right? So you don't have that fear to be attacked and be killed and be shot and be, deported, And Athena, you're talking about that. I'm someone who is naturalized. I have the fear. I have the fear myself. And I do have some type of privilege on my side, and I still have the fear. So when you think about it, is that fear of speak up and be attacked, imagine that other people that can stand behind you and can suffer even worse stuff than that, than be attacked. So maybe it's that invitation to be a brave witness and, and really step in and do the action. And maybe say, hey, I'm afraid to speak about that, but I'm imagine the people that cannot even speak. Maybe start by that. One is speak to that part that is afraid to feel shamed. I don't know much about that. What do I know that I have to speak up? Because some people can't, or they're afraid of. And I'm going to say is, even in social media nowadays, I'm afraid to speak up. I'm afraid to speak up. I come from Brazil. I'm originally from Brazil. We were when I born, that was not free speech. And I remember a teacher calling me out in the second grade. That is a part that I have. Be shut down and quiet. It's like, you don't ask those questions, right? Second grade still have, military power. And nowadays, I even joke with my daughters, like, hey, I survived one. I think I will survive the second one. If you need to fight, we fight. But it's like, we need to be smarter on that.
I got a question to throw in here with so all you're saying, kind of going back to the question, the original question, within your chapter and just within your own knowledge of all this, how do you feel is the best way to bring that into the therapy room with us, for all of us?
Yes. Yes. All right. Just say it. And well, the way I start to talk with my clients is say, hey, we have parts, and the society has parts that, oppress some of our parts, right? So when I ask for them to notice those parts, so I don't know, they bring about a fight with the partner. Okay, let's start there. And they bring a part that is very mad about the partner not listening, something like that. The way I always approach my clients, doesn't matter what is their background is, and I say, all right, so notice this part that is here right now, and notice any other part that you feel maybe don't belong to you, or maybe is judging your part right now, even doesn't come from me, or maybe comes from me, on be witness. Notice this part, notice the system that this part it's part of. So that is how, when we talk about anything, we know that is more than what is happening here. That is a whole system. Notice what is your values around fighting with a partner. Notice if is there, something that tells in verse. Notice that's a system that says you cannot divorce. Or notice that a system that says women should be, I'm talking about a woman right now because a woman should be in a certain way. So you come from this idea that, each part of the person experience, it comes with ancestor, it comes with their community, it comes with their identity, their spiritual life, their survival strategy, right? So it's not a single event. So you approach as it is, and notice everything that it brought this part here. Everything that inside and outside your system, it's telling this part to say something or to protect you in a certain way. So yeah, I think that's it. Just notice what is, it's not just
Love
one,
it.
just, right? We don't have just one part, as we are not just in one system.
So what's coming up for me as you're saying this is gratitude to all of you, and also gratitude that we're recording this so that I could go back and play it and go back and play it, because you said so many really just beautiful, wise things. So yeah, thank you. Now, I guess what I'm thinking is what happens when you're looking on these systems upon systems upon systems and really valuing the parts so that we could value this relationship of ourselves in the room of our parts, and one of the parts goes, oh shit, I gotta dissociate right now. What do we do then? And to turn to Athena to give us the answer. So Athena, I'm kind of transitioning to dissociation, but yeah, if you could say how I put, and maybe this was more my decision to put this into this section, but I really felt like dissociation is such a core piece of this fabric of framework that we're talking about here. And so I'd love, if it feels okay, how you see dissociation as being part of the framework, and how, what you want people to take out of your chapter to bring into the therapeutic space.
I'll start by answering your question very directly, and then I'll give some background. I kind of think of dissociation showing up as an indicator that permission or consent needs to be requested before I do anything else. And that's kind of how I frame my entire integration of EMDR, IFS, and whatever other approach I'm utilizing in my work with this population. Because, well, first of all, consent is obviously the opposite of a traumatic experience, and empowerment is also the opposite. So the way that I utilize the theoretical frameworks that I'm trained in and apply them into the work that I'm doing in the therapy room is I use structural dissociation of the personality as a way to understand the way fragmentation occurs and where this space between parts becomes more embedded as an automated way of being in the world over time. But I use IFS as a way to communicate in real time with systems. As a social worker, I look at the person in context, and the context is typically what fuels my passion, the context and the way it affects people's suffering. When we have an adult who has a system that is fragmented in this way, it reflects our inability as a society to protect children and intervene appropriately. So the existence of dissociative disorders, in my view, is a reflection of a humanitarian crisis in the way that we fail to help children. So that's the outside system, of negligence, like social negligence. And then I'm looking at the person in front of me who has parts. We all have parts. The difference being is that space between them and how big the gap is. So if it's a very large gap, I'm going to really soften my approach because I know that the gap is reflective of the pain that I'm seeing in front of me. And I know that, probably the person in front of me is not prepared to know the story in its entirety, and I'm going to honor that. And so the way that I use IFS is if I see a protector show up in the moment, I know that I may be moving too quickly. And perhaps I need to slow down. Whatever I need to do, I know it needs to be something different from what I'm doing in that moment. So I use it really as not just a way to help my clients become familiar with their systems and help me become familiar with their systems, but as a way to habitually gain consent for any kind of work I'm doing throughout any given therapy process.
Can I add something for that, Athena? Because
Yeah.
it's with our work with minority or global majority, because minority just in US. I think it's important to let people know when you talk about people who suffer racism,
Mm-hmm.
It's a survival mechanism on a sense of daily life. It's kind of like I joke with my clients, like, yeah, I put on my clothes, get my dissociation, go to the world, because if something happened,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to punch anyone. But it's also the other side of that is people of color tend to just bodily dissociation versus mind dissociation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good to notice that too. I know that in the online world, it's harder to see because we see like just this, the inverse triangle of, but maybe notice that too. It's something to, when you go into what you feel in your body, nothing. Pay attention to that nothing as dissociation rather than, just not connecting to a part take over that don't want to connect. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And oftentimes, if you feel nothing, you feel a lot.
Laura, your chapter, which is yet another framework, is this whole understanding about meaning, internal meaning, and spirituality, which is a beautiful addition to all of this. So if you could maybe speak about your chapter and what you would like people to take from that to add to this framework.
Thank you. Thank you for being for me to be a part of this conversation and, of course, the book. It's wonderful, as we've all been saying. So what I really hold present in general, and hopefully people do from my chapter, is that deep human need for meaning beyond ourselves. Right. So in spirituality, for a connection to the transpersonal, to something that is larger than just us. And we've already been talking about intersubjectivity. So in therapy, when the client and the therapist come in together, there is a new entity that arises, that emerges, which is that intersubjective field. It's its own life force. And as we've mentioned, we need to pay attention to that. It's all both systems, both parts, and the social context. And then what I'm also adding is that that field is also held by a larger field, that transpersonal, we could call the universal, maybe the collective unconscious, the ancestral realms, the field of infinite potential, the quantum field, the physicists would say, or people will name it by the names they have for the divine. And I think that connecting to that larger field is so important, and important in the work of therapy. And I've seen that connection is what can really soothe those parts that have those fundamental burdens of, am I enough? Do I matter? Do I belong? The answers are reflected in that field, I think. And my chapter offers some specific points of explicitly connecting with that field in our own choice of language, but also listening to our clients for that symbolic language, that mythic archetypal language, and reflecting it back to them, inviting them to invite guides and ancestors to be present, to create space for that. One thing I want to add that I find particularly interesting is I believe that this has an overlap with the AI use. So it's an expertise I've been developing, and I think AI kind of scratches the itch of connecting with larger realms, something bigger than us. We, of course, know that we anthropomorphize, we project, and those and other factors create a certain connection with AI where it appears to be omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, words we generally use for something else. And I've actually written a book about AI companions, and we're coming out this summer, and we'll talk about some of this. But I think it's really important to notice that hundreds of millions of people are turning to AI for emotional support and wisdom. And I think it's partly an attempt to connect with that kind of larger meaning. And so the point is, it's really important to everybody, or most people, right? And as therapists, we can really honor that and tap into that as a resource for our clients, and create the space in therapy for that spiritual realm and all the healing that it can bring to be present. And that's what I hope people take from the chapter.
Thank you. That's awesome. And that's a little nugget of gold there too with the AI. What questions do you have for each other? We already started a little bit, and I love that. Do you have any questions for, the other people here, and kind of, or comments on how you see them integrating with one another?
I do have something just to add from some of the literature synthesis that we've been doing over the years, is to really give therapists a tangible understanding of the dynamics of trauma and what language might then empower in our ability to attune and connect with one another. And then our tools can become a part of that process. But we use a blend of definition of trauma from both the systemic and social work field, and then the psychoanalytic field of anything that is too much too soon, too much for too long, or too little for too long, in the absence of secure attunement. And I'm just curious, from the perspectives represented here, the hope you find in IFS-Informed EMDR, not asking you to adopt that definition of trauma, but that's just to share my kind of context for how I'm understanding just the psychodynamic experience of trauma, and then that being the potential for the self to fragment in these ways in response to systemic forces of oppression, and also individual insecurity of domination, and of just being in the midst of that very delicate and sometimes tragic dependence of of attunement that we all have that can be wonderfully restorative and generative, but can also be the source of some of our worst experiences. So I'm just kind of curious where you all come from to see that hope of IFS-informed EMDR, what you hope to add in your adoption of it or your use of it.
For me, even though many of us have different perspectives, there's a way of being able to link each of what we're saying to one another, because each of us are talking about systems, and all of us are talking about, well, this is my perspective. I think, Athena, you might know that because we also study from structural dissociation. So it does seem as if like there's a lot of overlap there. And Laura, I was a software engineer before. I got some things to say about AI though, but it's really just to say that like in the same way, Bridger, because I know that you've spoken or written about memory reconsolidation as well, and how that's a core part of SIP as well, and for rhythm and processing as well. And so, like, I just want to say that I look at trauma as being the presence of suffering or the absence of compassion, and dissociation too is a way of being able to cope when the present moment is too much, when we're unable to find any other way. And so I just finished doing actually a group consultation of EMDR therapists, and we were speaking about humanizing dissociation. Of instead of, even though it is, there's culturally appropriate forms of dissociation, there are also pathological dissociation, which is trauma based. We're speaking about the utility and the function of dissociation, of how it helps people to be able to cope with things when it is too much, too soon, and too intense. And it just tends to be a strategy that often overextends or outlives its usefulness. But I also did want to say too that it's not just children that experience dissociation or the attachment wounding that's going to lead to dissociative responses. There have been some studies. Dr. Jennifer Fried has spoken about institutional betrayal. Dr. Jennifer Gomez has spoken about cultural betrayal, trauma theory, and how there's things that can happen even in our adulthood that may lead to dissociative symptoms. I say all of this because I help my clients. Ultimately, my goal with all of their different parts and the different aspects of them is to make my client the best therapist that they've ever met. If I'm able to help my client to make peace between the different parts. And so what Michelli and I have been speaking about or trying to convey in our chapter is that we can also find ways of resourcing with, Laura's talking about ancestors, resourcing with culture. And when we find that we can make peace between the different parts by giving them the resources that they need, we can then find alternative ways of having dissociation if it is a coping strategy, but also being able to use resources to ground oneself. So I kind of look at it that we need to recognize first that there is no enemy that is within us. We need to make it that there's peace between all the different parts. And when a person can heal from their trauma, eventually they start to realize that the self is the source of resources, that they are the resource they've been waiting for. We need to let people know that trauma are things that happen to them and that they are not the trauma, that no one is traumatized by their consent, but through their consent, we will find ways of being able to teach them to use resources that help them, that they get the choice of what resource their part needs. But ultimately, it's to help people to reclaim their awesomeness.
I might add that dissociation is one of their resources that are brought into the room. That a lot of people with dissociative disorders, the existence of parts is a very terrifying concept and one that carries a lot of shame. So once, IFS are the orientation towards parts it's normal. We all have them and they all are specialized and highly skilled, and those are resources that have always existed within us, but have either been distorted or squished by our contexts. And so the reframe that IFS offers to people with structural dissociation is, it's foundational, that this is a normal way of being in the world and it's perfectly fine, and not only just fine, but helpful and necessary.
And perhaps the secret of, healing is in some way the empowerment of our parts who are dissociating to be able to have some more control over when, how much, and then how do I turn it off?
I think that that is reflective of what David said earlier around building internal trust between parts is what brings relief and softens the necessity for dissociation. So that internal trust component of IFS is something I also lean heavily into with my work.
And to add to that as well is that I want my clients to know dissociation's okay, but to find to see if there are different strategies you can add to it as well. Because I feel that trauma works with this binary of either the presence of suffering or the absence of it. But what if it is that dissociation is one strategy, but also bringing in ancestor grandma into the session? I just finished telling some people, when you give people the ability to know they could bring their mother tongue into the session, that even if the therapist doesn't know the language of the client, if you can allow them to bring in their favorite cuisine from where their culture comes from, like ultimately we will find out when you have these amount of choices in EMDR therapy, in IFS, you will understand that grandma is undefeated. Anytime you can bring grandma into the session, whether she's in the physical or the ancestral realm, you can allow the client to know the ultimate disconfirmation that they are never alone. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. But yes, please.
And I add for that too is another view that I end up working with my clients, and when dissociation is a protector or oppressor. So I approach that as like, hey, they are our friends unless there is something happen with a dissociation that is more about harm or punish you. You know, I have a client that she goes her body and she's like, I don't even feel I'm alive. That how much dissociation happened on her body. And the work we have been done, we discovered that dissociations actually was family not talking about, unfortunately is incest happening. So you don't talk, you don't feel, you don't say it. And then that goes with opposite to surviving the racism was, I'm here just to survive and not pay attention to the things that will be more harmful so I can keep going during my day. So I think that change too of, how much of this energy, and that goes to Laura's spirituality talking is, all right, is this a spirit attachment? Not talk about the unattached burden. It's not that, but it feels like it's this, whatever energy that is feel higher is something that is bring life into your body, into your mind, or something that is taken away. And being part of the client's own system and multi-generation, like I said, like is that not just one system there? So I love that conversation.
Wow, I'm so appreciative of this conversation.
David, there's something coming out for me because I was talking with a colleague of mine from the community LGBTQIA plus, and we're talking about the work on ancestrality and how the hetero gene view that our ancestors all that. Sometimes when we do meditation and invite parts and invite ancestors, and for him it was a terrible moment of inviting the ancestor because my ancestor would kill me. My parents were horrible. Imagine my ancestors. So I think that other way to approach it too, going back to dissociation, going back to ancestrality, going back to spirituality, it's like, would that view of whatever spirituality that I learn would actually try to kill me, or would actually kill my parts? Or it's someone that we talk a lot about that, and I want to honor that sharing that he had with me.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that feels really important. Oh, I see a question. When dissociation is a part and protector in keeping trauma distant, how does EMDR help to balance?
Just to answer, I can only answer that just from my own perspective, but I just want to say for people who are reading the book and are contemplating being trauma specialists and all of these things, I do want to say that you don't have to do it alone. I do want to tell people that you can seek consultation because these are challenging. Each of us, okay, there's decades of research, decades of practice between each of us. And also, there's a love of this work as well. It's the only way how we could have written so much and done. And David, especially with all the editing and stuff that you did, we have a deep love for this. But I do want to explain that for any therapists who are considering doing this type of approach, seek consultation. You don't have to do it alone. Also, is that it's a good idea to first work on stabilization using the three-phase model. Stabilization first, then trauma treatment, and then integration. I just say it just because Pierre Genet was talking about it 100 years ago, but we got to bring it back into the present because unfortunately, there are some therapists who deny the existence of dissociation and are not really believing that this is an actual thing. So that's why, in our own ways, we are all trying to help other therapists to just know that there are different levels of dissociation. And when you can open that up for your clients, you can open up a world of possibility. For this specific case that's related here, I think you got to book a consultation. But I'll give you a basic idea here. Is that if dissociation is a part and protector in keeping trauma distant, it's really to say that, once again, as Athena was also saying as well, and as I was talking about, we just need to know what the role of the dissociation is. We also need to find out when the dissociation started. We need to get the story of it. I'm a couple and family therapist as well, in addition to being a social worker and psychotherapist. But dissociation also occupies a place in the family structure of the individual. Sometimes it also has a legacy. There's a legacy of ways that people dissociated. But once again, I just got to send that shout out to Dr. Marianne Kate for the mid 60. We need to also understand many of us have different ideas about what dissociation are. And it's not just one thing. There can be depersonalization, there can be derealization, there can be functional seizures. There's multiple ways that it can manifest. But that's why you got to make sure you do a proper phase one. You're properly assessing, but ultimately understanding that the dissociation serves a role. It serves a purpose. When we are able to help to heal the trauma that underlies it, we can see reductions in the intensity of some of these things, but that integration part is especially important as well. We need to make it that the client, that we're not taking away their one coping strategy. That if we are going to say you're not going to cut off access to your body, there needs to be a resource or a way of making it so that you still can love yourself, so that you still can feel at peace with yourself. And if you're able to, again, referring to Bridger again with his book, because you mentioned memory reconsolidation, predictive processing, you know what's up. You know what's up with that. So the thing is, it's really that ultimately we want to make it that a client is able to disconfirm the original narrative that dissociation has had in their lives, so that if you have the appropriate disconfirmation, you can force a prediction error, and that prediction error is going to ultimately lead to an updating of not only the internal model, but of the way how life can be as a system going forward. It's a deep, deep question. Deep question. Sorry. I'll leave it to someone else to continue.
I do want to add just to the conceptualization of the felt sense of the room whenever the moment that built this question kind of comes online. Like, there's so many dynamics that I think a traditional perspective at times locates squarely in the client's lived experience and does not explore what about the moment that just brought that energy into the room or brought that moment into the space, and how does my body as the therapist respond? How do my parts respond? How does all of that tell the story of the enactment this moment now represents, not just in, okay, dissociation is happening in the client's system right now, but what does the moment here mean about that happening here and now? Because I think, David, as you were mentioning the prediction error, I think that is a fundamental aspect of what we must understand to be able to generate an individualized disconfirming experience for the client, not just, oh, don't you see that this moment doesn't require that strategy anymore? So that's the prediction error. Something about the relational field has to confirm to both nervous systems at play that this means of connection is safe, and we can, with the integrative capacity, David, you were talking about earlier with some of the structural dissociation theory, the present moment has to tell that story for both systems to be able to believe it. It can't just be from one channel in EMDR, the cognitive channel. It can't just be from the emotional channel. The holistic embrace of each other as system, I think, has to be considered. And that's the mirror aspect of the chapter that I contribute, is really inviting us to see, okay, the way that question is written, which again, David, you said more consultation. Yes. Because like the way that's written, it's here's the client's lived experience, but what about ours as the therapist that was a part of that experience? Because it's to me, an us thing always. It's not me or you. It's some way in us. Now the dynamics there may favor one side or the other, but it is an us thing.
That's fantastic. And I do think, and Bridger, you describe it well, as well as the way how the therapist receives what the disclosures can be a disconfirmation. That can create a
Fundamentally.
prediction error.
Yeah.
I also want to say in some cases, you'll get some clients that'll say, man, I haven't had any positive experiences through my whole life. That's why rhythm and processing strategies, and also special shout out to Thomas Zimmerman, who developed the predictive processing flash model, which rhythm and processing technique is a derivative of. Even if a client doesn't have the positive attachment, or even if there's difficulty with the therapist alignment, we can create experiences of awesomeness in the session. We got YouTube at our disposal. We've got nature at our disposal. You can reconsolidate. I've been helping people to heal memories by using their pet in the session. When COVID happened and people couldn't go out to nature, we brought nature to them. You're able to use images online. You're able to use videos. You can use your favorite video game Twitch streamer, because I know there's some Gen Z, Gen A's up in this place right now. I guess maybe in the Q&A. I don't know. But the basic idea is that when Michelli and I are talking about culture, we're also talking about the subcultures. We're also talking about the interest of the client. And so what happens is that anti-racist psychotherapy is meant to bring in our LGBTQ people. They're meant to bring in our racially diverse, our religious minorities. It's meant to bring that in, but predictive processing opens up the possibility of what therapy can become. So we are able to help people to heal with their natural environment, that even if you might think that you might have had a hard childhood and there's no positive resources that are there, if you're a fan of Pokemon, if you're a fan of Super Mario, there's still experiences of joy that can be there. And the disconfirmation is not the cognitive only, it's the somatic disconfirmation of what that means for you. If we're able to feel a good feeling of joy, if we're able to think of hot, bubbly pizzas, this may not be the clear and the nicest way of disconfirmation that many of the researchers are going to think of. But trust me, if you're able to make a client feel something, that itself is a disconfirmation when we're talking about dissociation. And so we're able to make it then that we can create joy. That catharsis is unnecessary. We don't have to have the big tears and the big frustration. We can actually heal with revolutionary joy.
Well, thank you. And I feel like what you all did was really help me to just have this thread that just goes through each and every one of your chapters and really see the connection of all of them, which is just so great. And thank you for being here. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me today on Empowered Through Compassion. If you're looking for support on your own healing journey, we'd love to hear from you. My wife and I are both licensed social workers in Massachusetts, and together we co-founded Empowered Through Compassion to offer grounded, compassionate space for therapy, supervision, and trauma-informed couples work. You can learn more about what we offer on our website, www.empoweredthroughcompassion.com.